of people, and also meeting recorded. Cool. Missed the first bit. Yeah, I lent into the problem, and I guess just sort of, spoke to heaps of people in the space, ended up advising a bunch of companies and mentoring in a bunch of hackathons and things, and just learned, I guess, what the real issues were, and found that there really was just this crazy big disconnect. There were all these people passionate about the space or programs, but they sort of operated in isolation, and it wasn't being communicated or commercialized in a really good way. So there was just some missing links. A lot of businesses had awesome products or technologies, but didn't know how to transform them into commercial businesses and get into the sort of health system, or they couldn't communicate their value proposition, as well as there was a lot of, I guess, gaps from the educational perspective for everyone. So, when investors started looking at health tech, that was a big learning curve for a lot of them, which I know a lot of people are still undergoing. Not saying everyone, but, a lot of traditional investors had neglected health tech in Australia because it was risky. And given our public health system as well, there hasn't been a lot of money in it, like there might be somewhere in the US. But also, I guess, founders didn't have a huge understanding of the health side of things. And then health professionals also don't understand the world of tech and startups. So I decided that was a problem that I cared about, and it could be fun to try and fix. So What the Health was going to be a podcast at first, and was all ready to roll. I ended up having another surgery, random, got knocked on my back and started this little Substack in February. And I just thought that, people were coming to me for what was good in health tech, and it might save me 9 conversations if I put what I think is good and interesting in one place, and it might keep me sane while I was recovering from this surgery. But lo and behold, more than 10 people read, and it started to grow. And eventually it sort of, picked up speed pretty quick, and it became a community of sorts. And I started getting just heaps of people reaching out for all different things. And it was really clear that there was this pain point in terms of, I guess, that quality connection and digestible content, as well as, I guess, education and community. And so being the accidental community builder that I am, I lent into that and ended up, spinning off a couple of meetups before COVID hit, which was awesome. They will come back to Sydney and Melbourne before lockdown hit, once we eventually escape. But for now, it's kind of just a growing community around this Substack and a couple of other events and things that we're doing too. And the goal is to empower patients and professionals to create better health and health experiences and outcomes, as wanky as that sounds. I believe we can do this by creating quality content, connection, community, and collaboration in the space. And I find that it's a really interesting intersection to sit at. Anyway, enough of the boring stuff. So why health tech? I don't need to tell anyone on this call why health tech is pretty damn awesome. You literally get to change lives and just work with super passionate people. You can be on cutting edge technology or just redesigning really terrible processes. And working with great people on great problems is so fulfilling. But there is a really, really long way to go. So trends in health tech more broadly. So this is sort of my favorite emerging macro trends, and you ask, a whole heap of different people, you get a whole heap of different answers. But to start, I think personalized medicine is super, super interesting. Previously in medicine, we've sort of treated things like it's very black and white and one size fits all, but we all know that everyone is very different. And finally, we're sort of hitting, I guess, the technological capabilities and scientific capabilities to do that. So we can help personalize things for people from both the physiological at a cellular level, just type of things with tests and insights. So everything from diets and what medications you should take and what types, as well as digital as well. So allowing people to really tailor those experiences and have a bit more choice in the process, which is super exciting. The second is data. Everyone talks about data going to be more valuable than gold, and it's 100% true. But in health, I think we need to take a step back and realize that the data and the quality of it is a little bit suboptimal. it hasn't really been captured. A lot of it is still sitting in paper form, in messes everywhere. And, we should probably first get electronic health systems in every hospital as a baseline. But for context, in places like South Australia and WA, they were sitting at, I think WA was at 5% at the start of this year of hospitals had an electronic health system. So we sort of need to really, get on top of that. And there is awesome opportunity to, I guess, capture that data and use it in new ways to improve health experiences. But there is a long way to go.
I am sorry, just to interject here. I think the slides might currently be frozen or not moving yet.
Ooh.
So have a trends. There we go. Awesome.
Got it. Sorry, guys. Thanks for that. It's really terrible. Tech is not my strong point. That's why I just write about it. Anyway, now we've got the slide. Experiences. So optimizing, designing, and streamlining experiences is also super interesting and a really big opportunity. So if you look to somewhere like the US, Amazon is a really great example. Obviously, they have done a great job with creating really quality experiences and getting logistics in place and streamlining things. And because of the way they've done that for retail, they can now transfer that to healthcare. And they have been at quite a rapid rate. And I think that's a super, super exciting prospect. Australia might be a couple of steps behind, but there are some really cool niche experiences that are emerging. And it's definitely an area to watch. But also the current experiences, I guess, for patients and professionals, as I mentioned previously, hasn't been so great. And as that quote says at the bottom, just because something has always been that way, it doesn't mean it should be. And this really, really applies for health. I think, we've used the same processes for decades, if not hundreds of years. And what's happened largely is we've come along with these technologies and we've been trying to squish them into previous workflows, but that doesn't actually work. What needs to happen is it needs to either be designed, like co-designed with people using it to integrate it, or the actual probably better solution in many cases is to completely redesign the workflows, because going forward, it doesn't mean, that's the way we should do it and can do it with technology now. Which leads us to co-design and collaboration, which are super big buzzwords I'm sure you've all heard. And basically this is both for teams and patients. Healthcare has always been tried to be patient-centric and work in teams, but the reality of it is it hasn't actually been that way. It's been a very paternalistic model. So how doctors and healthcare professionals, feel things should go, often that's what you're given, and patients don't really get a choice in the matter, or many choices, and it's sort of inflicted upon them. And there's also been a lot of issues with, if you've had to work with multiple health professionals or multiple teams, having that integrated and actually being cohesive to create a good quality of care has been very challenging, and often meant that a lot of people don't engage or drop off, and it's just really been suboptimal from everybody's standpoint. So it's super exciting that people might actually start to get a say and co-design some of the experiences and actually collaborate. The next one is patient empowerment, and that is very much tied into co-design as well. But I think previously patients have very much been getting on the ride, and it's been more of a band-aid fix system for healthcare. So it's been geared towards fixing things when things go wrong, as opposed to fixing things before they go wrong or early on, and empowering people to do that themselves. But there's a big movement towards that and preventative healthcare, which is great to see. And that's why we're seeing so much health content come out now, as the guys at UC are starting to do really, really well. And I think that's a huge trend that is going to take off, and pretty much any D2C healthcare business is really going to have to ride, including clinics as well in the future. And last but not least, AI. Now, AI is awesome, don't get me wrong, and it's a huge, huge, huge opportunity. And we've seen so much investment into tech companies in the space recently, especially from, I guess, the traditional bigger VCs in Oz. But we're actually a lot further behind than we think. Healthcare does have, very set lot of problems that do fit the data capabilities and theoretical problems that AI can solve down the track. So it's a wonderful fit. but it's going to take quite a long time to get there, which ties into a bit of the data capture sort of stuff and organization. So it's cool, but I think, the reality is we need to take a tiny bit of a step back with expectations. And also what people don't know is a lot of the successful AI companies, they might be successful from a tech perspective, but from a business model perspective, that is something else altogether. And I mean, that will be worked out later. That's okay. But that is also a serious consideration. Did my slide change? Yeah, maybe. Yes, that's a nod. Good. So I thought it'd be good to go into a tiny bit of the Australian ecosystem, because there were some questions about where we rank in terms of the world and where we're at. And look, this graphic kind of depicts what healthcare is like. It kind of always looks okay from the outside, or did pre-COVID. But then when COVID hit, it sort of, it placed extra pressure on our already stretched system, and we saw it break, and don't get me wrong, Australia is a great place and we have a wonderful healthcare system. We actually came third in a recent survey by the Commonwealth Fund in the US, which ranked 11 of the sort of major players in the world healthcare system. But just from, I guess, a tech perspective, we're still very young and a little bit behind. Compared to places kind of like the US or the UK, we're probably 5 to 10 years behind. We're also more similar to a system like the UK, given their NHS public system. So very lucky to have our public system, but because there isn't just crazy demands for terrible, I guess, real poverty in the health system, not saying that there isn't, but compared to say the US, there hasn't been that need for innovation, nor I guess the monetary gain from innovating, because people just haven't been open to it. And so what needs to happen here is we sort of need to go back and invest in the seedlings of our companies and the real baseline structures to, I guess, build our health tech capabilities. And we will get there, but it just takes time. And we're sort of seeing that happen now with heaps of government investments in all these new incubators and accelerators. I swear to God, there's about like 20 that's popped up in the last few months. It is wild. If you want to start a health tech company, your odds aren't bad right now. But it's going to take a little bit of time to see the quality, as well as, I guess, the people able to support those companies too, because not many people have actually done it really successfully in Australia yet. Everyone's learning. And as I mentioned before, there's a really big disconnection problem with people, operators, industry, education, and capital. And there's sort of been a lot of innovation theatre in the past, we'll call it, where, because we haven't, I guess, invested or known a lot about really quality health tech solutions, we've put on pedestals people who have come up with what seems like good ideas, but the actual commercialization side of things and product market fit and creating usable products has been a really big problem. Solutions have usually been designed by founders who don't have heaps of knowledge in the health tech system or health system, or doctors who are sort of like, oh, this would be nice to have, but don't necessarily understand the business need or other facets that are required. Not saying this is everyone, there's some awesome successes as well, but that is sort of largely the trends. And basically, like everything, it's not a tech problem, it's a people problem, and comes back to that sort of cultural baseline and expectations, which we need to work on from every sort of perspective. So who is out there in the Oz ecosystem? Well, there is a lot of people. And look, to be honest, these are probably more of the, I guess, more commonly known ones and popular ones that I'm sure heaps of you guys know. But health tech is a super, super broad umbrella. And I think what helps is to break it down just a tiny bit. I think the most common one a lot of us refer to, I use us as more, I guess, startup world and VC.
Not us, no.
With that. Oh well. I think we refer to it. You guys can see my slide, right? Yeah, it's awesome. is more digital health. And so digital health is everything from sort of, the systems that run practices to digital therapeutics and things like that. And so we've got really cool companies like Perks who use behavioral change for therapeutics and things like that, and have grown quite significantly. Mindset Health as well use hypnosis for a whole heap of different conditions, which is quite amazing. And obviously Eucalyptus as well has created a big digital infrastructure platform and then rolled out a bunch of brands as well in a D2C way, which I think is really interesting and not necessarily perceived or received well by a lot of the health world yet, but I think they're doing great stuff, and people will come around to it, and it'll also push that change. But we've also got, biotech, which is sort of more, I guess, the biological solutions for things like cancer and stuff, and has a whole heap of applications. We've seen a lot of biotech IPOs this year and a lot of biotech funding. It's a bit crazy, but that is a different niche. There's hardware, so that covers things like Defector, who I think had a press release the other day and announced their funding from Blackbird coming out of stealth mode, but they are aiming to revolutionize vascular health, and so enable people to scan and figure out, if they've got vascular disease or risk factors for it earlier, and hopefully prevent that, which is really cool. There's deep tech as well, which is more of those deep scientific and engineering issues, and longevity too is a really fun sort of subset, which is looking at anti-aging, but does cover things like sort of cancer and cell depletion and stuff like that too. And there's a lot of money in the US coming from people like Jeff Bezos and I guess all of Silicon Valley, really, because everyone's interested in living longer. But these are a bunch of my favorite companies, I suppose, at the moment. I'm very biased and love digital health, but think these guys are doing a great job. If you haven't seen any of them, check them out, but they're probably stock standard in the current loop of health tech companies. And I can definitely cover more of them later. But how to break into health tech? Look, I use this GIF just as I think because it's kind of an accurate depiction of what it is like going into health tech right now. Not always, don't get me wrong, it's also really awesome. But from the outside, it looks shiny and everyone has a lot to say about it. And there's all these funding rounds and stuff going into it, but it is a little bit of a mess. So just be prepared, but it's also amazing. And there's so much opportunity and it's only going to get bigger and better. And so how to get in? Right now, there isn't heaps of visibility across the space, and it has been a problem, but it's getting better. My first go-to, like anything, would be LinkedIn and websites, and I should probably add as well Slack communities there. So obviously Earlywork has heaps of great jobs posted, but things like Startup Vic and any of the other Slack groups as well have cool roles. But just have a look at the different companies and players out there. And then from there, you can honestly reach out directly to so many people. The biggest thing I get from health tech founders is they're like, if someone wants to talk to us, just literally shoot us a note, flick us an email to the CEO. And most of the time, if they're a smaller company, they'll make time for a chat. Or if they're a larger company, you can just reach out to someone else who's got a role there that you think might be able to shed some light or provide some value. But I would just say be specific with your reach outs and try to be concise as well, because people don't always have time to read really long emails. The passion is great, but go with a really clear value proposition of why you're interested or a specific question, and see if they have time for a chat, or even pitch yourself. Be like, I think I can help in this way, or I would love to add to your mission. And that's a really good way just to get on the radar, even if you don't have a specific role in mind, or they don't then. These relationships take time and it really does build. And to be honest, that's sort of what I did last year after, I'd initially got that health tech bug. I then just started reaching out to people who were successful in health tech and was like, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing, would love to know more in any ways I could help. And lo and behold, a few years later, or a year and a bit later, it's come back around, and now I can help them. And I've developed some really great relationships there. The other thing would be pretty obvious: accelerators, incubators, and universities. There is a million health tech accelerators now. It's quite absurd, and a lot of programs, but they don't always publicize, I guess, their cohorts and the roles available and things like that. But it's a really good place to just get all resources, and they can pretty much plug you in with anyone in the space. Obviously, there's also all the VC boards and resources that are popping up too. So pretty much every VC now has a content arm as well as a jobs board. So you can always check them out if you know that there's a specific health tech portfolio you're interested in. And otherwise, I also recently launched a jobs board. So shameless plug, but I realized that there wasn't really, I guess, a good place to go for this stuff. And a lot of people reach out to me asking where to go and what companies I think are good. So I decided to help streamline that and not source them all and put them in a little newsletter that then disappears into the world. I'd launch a little jobs board. So feel free to check that out as well. And if you know any companies hiring or anyone who might like it, flick it their way to, I think it's sitting at like 157 jobs, which is wild. And just a couple of resources, which is all my resources, which is terrible, but I mean, there's a heap others too. So there's the Substack, which you can find all the sort of TLDR summaries of what's going on in health tech every 2 weeks, as well as I do sort of analysis and insights pieces, and we'll be bringing on, I guess, what do you call it, guest contributors soon, and growing the content side. So if that's of interest too, let me know. But it's always at least semi-entertaining, I hope. Sign up. I also made this Australian Health Tech Resources open source doc, which is linked on the Substack page, but I'll drop in the chat after this too. But it's full of all these different resources. So accelerators, VCs, courses, bodies in the space. It needs an update, but there's heaps in there, and feel free to let me know if there's anything I need to add as well. It's sort of just, I guess, a really good go-to guide to dip your toes in the water. And then obviously the jobs board, and we're trialing talent pools too, just because as well, I get a lot of companies reaching out asking if I know anyone in this space. Usually it's around students and either executives or health professionals. So if that's of interest, we're beta testing that, just sort of capturing people and then doing a bit of matching and pinging you if we think a role might be a fit or if a company is interested. It can all be sort of de-identified, so anonymous completely, but if they're like, oh, I like the sounds of them and they're passionate about this, they can also sort of reach out to you. Might not work, but we'll try it. So yeah, in summary, it's a bit of a mess at the moment, the health tech sphere, but it's also so much fun and it's only going to get better from here. And I honestly think that every company, at least to some extent, will become a healthcare company or have some health component, as we're all seeing, you know, with the mental health movement and workplace well-being. It's just becoming so essential and everyone needs health. So I think it's a great time to get in. But yeah, questions?
Awesome. And thank you so much. It's super, super cool to get a bird's eye view of kind of all those different areas of kind of health tech stacked together. I think, as you mentioned, like, you know, an earlier point that was like super, super good is like in Australia, this space is super fragmented. So you might hear about like some cool startup, or you might hear about, you know, like some news story. But yeah, I think traditionally we haven't really had that nexus or hub for this area. So it's super awesome to see the work you're doing with What the Health. We'll probably hop now to Q&A as per the questions prompts on the slide. So feel free to start dropping those in the Zoom chat. I know we've already got a couple there. I might just kind of kick us off just with, I suppose, a question around, I think, the role of government in, I suppose, health tech innovation. It's a really interesting one because obviously, you know, healthcare is a very sensitive area. Australia has a, you know, very strong kind of government infrastructure in terms of healthcare. And what I'd be really interested to understand is, like, for, you know, people looking to build and innovate in the healthcare space, to what degree there exists the potential to collaborate with government departments, funding from government departments. And I suppose, yeah, are there kind of currently problems with that relationship and collaboration?
It's a really, really great question. And I think it's very apparent for everyone that it's been one of the blockers in the past. So it's funny, I actually have meetings every week. So I work with, I guess, a bunch of doctors groups at the moment. And so they sort of operate obviously as doctors as well, you know, in practice, but a lot of them do a lot of consulting to government and boards and health techs and things. And just the stories coming from them is insane. It's like, the government really doesn't have these channels developed yet, but last year really kicked them into action and made them realize that they need it, as we've seen sort of from the vaccine rollout and booking systems like that too. And I think, they're sort of, the government usually takes time, like anything in innovation. It's always private first and then it funnels down to public, but they are building out those channels. A lot of the new incubator programs have specific partnerships with the government, which is awesome to see. I think it will take time though, just from an actual, I guess, how it works and adoption perspective, as well as regulations. We all know that regulations and compliance, are a big thing in health. It's bad in any industry, but specifically health. And so it will be a blocker for a while, but they're trialing things. New South Wales is particularly good at this. And also I would say Queensland, they've funded a whole heap of new incubators and accelerators, which is crazy, and have direct links into hospitals. The other thing as well is a lot of the universities have some cool programs. So there's the biodesign program, which I think is out of USyd and UMelbourne. And there's also the TRAM, or Translating Research at Melbourne program, which is specifically in a hospital, but working with the university and a couple of other players to sort of co-design solutions there. It's the start of something. And I think it's that thing where the channels just need to be set up, or you just need to know the right people at the moment. But yeah, I think it's going to be a slow process. Everyone says they're keen, but the actual reality of implementation is a bit different. But I would say keep trying too, because it really depends on who you know in this space at the moment. There's appetite for at least some of the things. It's just finding the right doors, which is crazy. But yeah, we'll get there.
No, super fair call. So it's like there are government resources there. There are some programs popping up there, but the visibility of those, the discoverability of those is in of itself a problem. And obviously, with What the Health, that's a big part of the mission. Super cool. We might hop over to a question I saw in the chat from Rahil around kind of the risk of, I suppose, like investing in the space kind of traditionally and now. Rahil, if you want to hop on and ask this one.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so you mentioned that historically investors considered investing in the space as being risky. Was this risky relative to other industries? Was it a founded risk evaluation? If so, why was it founded? And finally, is it still risky today?
Great question. Look, I think it's definitely founded risk. Healthcare is risky. And, as we laid out, there's so many different areas. Things like digital health might be slightly less risky, just from a sort of compliance and regulation perspective. And also there's a bit more of a clear-cut business models, but things like deep tech, for example, the cycle is so much longer. Everything in health tech is longer. And I think in Australia, we just haven't been prepared to invest in those sort of long cycles and see those returns, as well as there's really much more, heavier capital demands as well. You need more money to get those things off the ground. There's all these like trials, like cycles and cycles of trials you have to go through. So it is more risky and more hurdles. And I think there's a shift towards a bit more appetite there, but it's still, I think it's becoming, I don't want to say less risky. We're getting better. I think it's two sides, right? So the business quality hasn't necessarily been there, or the ability to commercialize and create good products, but also there hasn't been the investment to even see if they work. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg problem. And honestly, we don't know yet. It really comes down to the company, the investor, the knowledge, the area, and there's just so many different segments. So I can't really answer that question directly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sounds like a very hard problem. Yeah, I guess we'll have to see how it pans out, like in the next few years, next decade, maybe. Is that the plan? Just make more visibility, like around health tech, and hopefully the barriers will come down or a little bit. Is that what we're looking for?
I think so. I think it's yes, visibility, but also I think I mentioned at the start, the baseline, right? We really need to make sure that we're helping create commercially viable and quality companies. So I think that hasn't necessarily been there. So that's one side of it. But then as well, we need to take punts on people who do know what they're doing. And there hasn't really been that much capital flying around or risk tolerance. Like, Blackbird claimed at the start they were never going to invest in health tech. That was in their, investment thesis, and then they changed and have invested in some absolute killer ones, right? And that's sort of what we're going to probably continue to see happen. It's just a matter of those things working out. But also the problem is Australia isn't a big market. Like, it's a really big problem. We have a public system and it's a small population size. So for you to get the growth and returns that VC traditionally wants, you usually have to go overseas, right? If you don't have an international remit, then there's a strong chance you won't have a big enough market for most venture capital funds here, or previously. But we're also seeing a shift in the mindsets of VC as well, right? So some of the returns don't necessarily have to be that big. And funds like, or out capital funds like Tractor are investing in things that are more sustainable and just gradual growth, as opposed to the sort of classic hockey stick thing. So it'll be really interesting to watch.
Cool, thanks. A lot of good insights there.
Cool. I know Sam, who's in the call, had a couple questions on the Slack chat, super good ones earlier on. So Sam, if you want to kind of hop on and maybe ask the top of mind one for you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So basically, I wanted to understand how's the data interoperability scope in Australian healthcare system, because I see a lot of hospitals, basically the whole infrastructure, what I've studied and observed is that they're not synced in terms of how the data flows from one hospital to other. As you said earlier, a lot of people sometimes go to one hospital and then the other. So I just want to understand that first.
Oh, a good question, and I can't answer it completely because it is a really complicated problem, but you're 100% on the money. So interoperability is such a big buzzword, and it's a very real problem, especially in Australia. So for example, like I did my research thesis in the emergency department at St. Vincent's, and we had like one system, and I was pulling all my data from that system for about 5 years. And I pulled from that system and then the national system, and the data sets were completely different and like just didn't sync at all. And it was supposed to be just one hospital region that all had the same data. And that's really, really common within hospitals. They have different things in different departments a lot of times. And I think it's a really tricky problem because that baseline infrastructure that's been set up, it hasn't been universal, and they don't all speak to each other, and it's been very plug and pull as well. So, we've bought a lot of systems from the US, which hasn't fit necessarily the Australian ecosystem and things like that, or the Australian system. And then there hasn't really been a lot of, I guess, investment in maintenance as well, a lot of the time. I did a panel with like some of the EMR guys, and electronic medical systems are not my strong suit, but I learned a crazy amount. And just from their perspective, they were saying that it seems that the government hasn't wanted to invest in both, the people adoption. So, people haven't been able to use the systems properly or wanted to, and then they haven't invested in the systems as well previously. So it's kind of a bit of a, mishmash of all of a sudden they're trying to get these baseline systems in, and the depth of that problem is just absolutely nuts. If there's any way that people can solve it in terms of building infrastructure to make them speak to each other, that will be interesting. But I think it's going to be more of a bottom-up approach and watching the government roll that out.
Yeah, thanks for answering that. One more question I had that was like, in terms of medical data ownership, what's this in Australia for that? Because based on what I studied, data ownership is like a massive problem, specifically in the West, in terms of like patient medical records and doctor notes are mostly confined towards the hospital as well, because there's a lot of policies that restrict data from going from the hospital towards people, which are basically supposed to be the owners of the data, because patients can then sue hospitals, and there's a lot of hesitance towards that. So what's the scope in Australia for that?
Ooh, that is also another very tricky question. You're asking questions that can't really be answered, which is really terrible, but it's true. That is the ultimate question. Data ownership is on everyone's minds, right? I think, and we haven't even seen the sort of legislation come out yet. There is a lot of concern about risk, which is why it's causing a lot of problems for a lot of startups coming through, because there is concern about people being sued and hospital systems and stuff, which is a real shame. But at the moment, it seems that the ownership tends to be owned by the doctors or the health system. And that's why it's so hard for you. If I was to change GP, I have to try and contact them and get them to transfer the notes. And it often costs a fee, which is insane. And you don't have these complete medical records. Obviously, the government tried to use my health record to fix that, but that didn't really go so well. It's great in theory. They meant well in theory, but I think that data ownership thing just needs to be really stripped back and looked at, and for everyone to agree, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. But I think it's a fascinating problem. And if we look to the US, obviously the hospital systems are selling data to the likes of Google and stuff to build algorithms, which is, fair but questionable. But there's also some really cool companies coming out that are focusing on bringing the data ownership back to patients. I think that's a really cool, opportunity to use data ownership, and potentially things like, eventually I'll be killed for saying this, but the blockchain and just central databases like that, and allowing patients to then contribute their data to, say, medical studies or whatever they choose to do with it, and have a bit of a bartering system, and then just give a bit more of that power back to the patients. But whether that will happen in a public system like ours anytime soon is a very, very interesting thing.
Right. Thanks for that. Thanks for answering the question.
Awesome. Well, folks, look, I think we're at time, but it was a super, super cool session. And Em, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I think I now need to do a lot of Googling, because I think there's a lot of things that in that presentation, I'm hang on a minute, I understand very little about that. And so a lot of rabbit holes to go down. And for all those who are still on here, thank you so much for staying on a little bit over time. We'll post the links to Em's kind of newsletter, jobs board, and free healthcare resources just in the Earlywork community Slack chat after. And for kind of any future masterclasses, if there are topics you're keen to see, or if you want to do one or know someone who'd be good to host one, definitely feel free to message myself, Marina, or Jono.
Okay, thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
See ya.
Thank you.